Welcome to another Todd Talk, where we take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. This video is intended for parents, and the purpose for this video is to figure out how to work with your teacher of your gifted child to get the best results. And so I'm going to give you 5 pieces of advice for when you, as a parent, how to work with a teacher. And this will hopefully then lead to a smooth process for having your child's needs met and getting them challenged. So a couple of things before we get to the 5 pieces of advice to think about. Number 1, do your homework. So what I mean by do your homework is figure out what the district that your child goes to. Figure out what its policies and its programs are for gifted. You want to be informed. You can go to the district website to try to find where that information can be found. Sometimes that information can be a bit difficult to decipher, so don't hesitate to reach out to the gifted coordinator just to ask about the policies and the programs. And I'm sure that they will be happy to discuss with you what these are. So that's one piece of groundwork you can do ahead of time. Another thing is, when you do get this information, keep in mind that you might have more information than the teacher themselves, especially if your student is placed within a regular ed classroom, because not all teachers are aware of the district policies and programming. And so keep in mind, you shouldn't assume that in talking to the teachers that they're aware of all these things as well. So make sure that you have that knowledge when you're going in. So the second thing you might want to think about to do as homework ahead of time is when you're talking with your child about the teacher. So in other words, if your child is growing frustrated because of the way that the teacher is teaching the class, or they feel bored, resist the urge to talk negatively about the teacher, or to make grand generalizations about the way that teacher is teaching. What you don't want to do is plant into the head of your child that this teacher is an inadequate teacher, because your child will latch on to that in many cases. And then this becomes their narrative. And it's going to be very difficult for them to learn from this teacher, because they're like, okay, my narrative is this teacher is not a good teacher. My parent is also, verifying this. And so I'm just not going to be able to learn anything from this person. And so we don't want to set that up with our child. So try to avoid talking negatively about the teacher. Even if you feel that way, don't express those feelings to your child. You want to make sure that your child, forms their own opinions of a teacher, and you want to also make them understand the other viewpoint. Like if they think, oh, that teacher is boring, try to help them to understand the other side of the story, or the other viewpoint, and the situation the teacher finds themselves in as well. So that's the second thing you can do for the groundwork before you have this meeting. The last thing is figure out before the meeting, what exactly do you want from this meeting? What are your goals? What do you want for your child? You should have a concrete idea of what this looks like. And this way, when you go in to talk with the teacher, you can show them what this looks like rather than give them an abstract idea. So if you want what are your child's needs? Does your child need to be challenged more? Does your child need to have their social emotional needs met? Does your child need to learn how to work with others better? So what specifically are the needs for your child? And go into the meeting with this concrete ideas in your mind, so that when you're talking with the teacher, you can point to this. This is kind of what I would like to see my child get from this class, and this is what I feel their needs are. So with that groundwork being laid, let's talk about the 5 things to consider when having this meeting with a teacher. The first thing is make sure you're having the meeting with the teacher. Don't go above their heads and go immediately to the administrator. The message this sends, whether intended or not, is I don't trust the teacher, I'm going to their boss, and I'm telling on them. I know that seems very juvenile, but we live in a juvenile world. And sometimes when we do things like this, that's the message that comes across. And that's not the message you may be trying to send. So go to the teacher. Make sure you ask the teacher for a meeting before you go to district office or to their principal. Or you want to make sure that you are building this trust with the teacher. That's really important. So the first piece of advice is this. When you're talking with the teacher, try not to come off as critical of the teacher. In other words, try not to say, well, you do this, so my child does this. What's that's going to do to any human being, whether it's a teacher or not, it's going to put them on the defense. And then the teacher's going to spend the rest of the conference possibly defending themselves. And thus they're not going to be listening to you and trying to figure out the best way to work with your child. So you don't want to get them on the defense. You don't want to get them on their toes, ready to try to have to fight for their justify what they're doing. You want to have a conversation. So approach it more like, they're the expert. Treat them as the expert. Not everything they say is exactly what should be, but you don't go into your doctor and tell your doctor, this is the way you should doctor me. Or you don't go into your banker and say to them, this is the way that you should do your banking with me. And so, but a lot of times parents will go in and tell teachers, this is how you should be teaching my child. When in fact, the teacher, because they went to school and got a degree and got a license, it technically is the expert. So you should to defer to them as the expert, while at the same time bringing your own information to the meeting as well. So, because no one likes to be, who works really hard and tries to meet the needs of students, likes to be told that they're not doing that. It's going to make them very defensive. So that's piece of advice number one, is treat the teacher as the expert and try not to be critical of what they're doing. Try to figure out what is going on. If your child says that they're bored, try to get down, keep in mind the messenger. The child is the one that's saying that's bored. Is that truly what's happening? Okay, instead of saying my child's bored in your classroom, say my child comes up and says they're bored. What are your observations in the classroom? Turn to their expertise. The second piece of advice when you're having this meeting with a parent is work for a consensus. Keep in mind, you may have in mind, this is what I want to get out of the meeting, but it doesn't mean that's what's going to happen. There's going to have to be a compromise. And so you have to be willing to be flexible in that and understand that you may have to come to a compromise because you might have certain expectations of what you want, but there are limitations within the system. I mean, that's one thing that because they're the expert, that you might not understand as the parent is there are constraints. There are only certain things that you can do as a teacher. And so they know that, you may not know that. And so when you're coming together and having this meeting, understanding that you may not get exactly what you want, but in the back and forth with the teacher, you can come to an agreement that's going to work best for your child. The third piece of advice is offer solutions and suggestions rather than just pointing out things that are wrong. So you can say statements like, well, when I work with them at home, I tend to find that this works. Okay, that might give the teacher an insight. You're not saying what you're doing is wrong. You're just saying, well, this is what I do. And the teacher may say, oh, I do that too. Or they may say, oh, that's something I can consider. Instead of saying, when you do this, they find that they don't like that. Say, well, here, it's something you might want to consider. Again, in doing your homework, I read that some students really react to higher level questioning or to projects. Are there projects that my student can be doing? Extension projects. So come with solutions. If you just come in and you say, you're not meeting the needs of my student, you come up with the solutions. If you have some suggestions in place that are reasonable solutions, that's going to be helpful. The fourth piece of advice to consider is, do you have a plan in place when you leave the meeting? So in other words, you've come to this compromise. You've talked about ways to meet the needs of this child. What is the plan? What is this going to look like? What is the communication going to look like? Now, what the communication should not look like is, hey, I need you to give me daily updates on how things are going with my child. That's an unrealistic expectation to ask of a busy teacher who has a lot on their plate. But could you say, hey, do you mind if I send you an email once a week to check in with what's going on, just to give you a reminder that I'd like to know what's going on? So things like that, when you leave with a firm plan in place, then everyone knows what their role in this plan is, including your role. And that leads us to our fifth piece of advice is don't put the burden of everything back on the teacher. So you have to be willing to take on some of this burden as well. So for example, if the student is not showing certain executive functioning skills, what are you going to do at home to help reinforce these? What efforts are you going to make? A teacher doesn't expect you to do it all, but the teacher does expect you to meet them some part of the way. So the teacher can't do everything. So what burdens are you willing to take on as well? So you can say, well, I noticed this about them. What can I be doing at home to help with this? And that's, again, asking for a suggestion of what they could be doing. So remember, first and foremost, you both want the same thing, which is that they and you both want your child to learn. Now, you also have to keep in mind that when you're working with a teacher, this teacher may have had little to no background information on gifted when they went through their pre-service training, and they may not have any professional development on how to work with gifted students. So when you ask for them to help challenge your gifted child, they may just not know how to do that. So tell them what your needs are, and then, come up with suggestions and work together for what this might look like. Because ultimately, you both want the same thing. And when you come at a parent in an aggressive manner, when you come at a teacher in an aggressive manner, that teacher is going to be on the defensive. And then what happens, whether they mean to or not, the unintended consequences, then they're like, well, I'm not going to give in to that parent's request. I'm not going to give it. And they're not doing it to spite the child, but they become frustrated because they feel like they're being challenged. You remember the old saying that you can attract more flies with honey than with vinegar. So if you go in with a positive attitude, explain what your desires are and your wants are, and show them what you would like to get out of this, then I don't know why a teacher wouldn't want to meet those needs as well. Now, when you do, if you go up that avenue and you've done your homework, you've done your part, and you've done everything that you feel that you can, and you've made an effort, and the teacher is still not meeting the needs, and you've had many conversations with that teacher, then you should feel like you can involve the principal, or you can call the gifted coordinator, or you can get someone else involved, because maybe this teacher doesn't have the support that they need. And that's how you should approach it. Hey, I'm calling you because my child's teacher doesn't seem to know how to challenge my student. Do you have any ways that you can support them or to give them some resources? And rather than, hey, my child's teacher is not doing a good job, and I'm telling you that to let you know. So again, it's the way that you approach things that very well, many times, is going to get you what you want. They often say sometimes that the squeaky wheel gets the oil, and that might be a temporary fix, but then you'll also be labeled as a problem parent. And then, believe it or not, teachers do talk. Those reputations do carry up, and they'll say, well, this parent is really difficult to work with. And then that's how that teacher approaches it, whether they've had any interaction with you or not, because a reputation's been established. You don't want to develop a reputation. So go on with positive intentions. Make sure that you make it very clear that you're just trying to advocate for your child, And when you come at that approach, a teacher is going to want the same thing. And they're going to want to try to do what they can within reason. You do have to keep in mind is that your requests need to be reasonable. If you're asking the teacher to do something that is out of their control or out of within reason, like you're asking them to do double the work that they normally do, or you're asking them to focus on your child when there are 29 other children that are in that classroom, there are reasonable requests. And so you have to ask yourself, is my request reasonable? So hopefully this advice will help you when you talk to the teacher and trying to help get your child's needs met.